Today, we're doing a deep dive into Charlie Kirk's book from 2020.
That's right. And Charlie Kirk himself, most people probably know him as the founder, the president of Turning Point USA.
Yeah, TPUSA. That organization has grown really rapidly. It's a big voice for conservative youth, especially on college campuses.
Definitely. And he was also chairman of Students for Trump, which is, obviously relevant here.
Absolutely. Now, the book, who's it aimed at? Cook gets pretty explicit, isn't he?
He is. He says it's for patriots who are against big everything. So he's really talking to ordinary Americans who feel, and this is his phrasing, bombarded on all sides by coastal billionaires and their government stooges.
Strong language there. It definitely sets itself up as something different, an alternative to what he calls the old right and also the new left. He's trying to carve out its own space, it seems.
Exactly, a distinct ideological space.
So what's the core problem the book is trying to solve? What's the central question it's asking?
Well, at its heart, I think it's trying to answer something pretty fundamental for that movement. How do you take these powerful slogans, America first, make America great again, how do you turn that energy into something more concrete?
Like a coherent set of principles, actionable policies.
Precisely. A real policy narrative for the future, more than just a slogan.
He sees it as a set of principles, even a core philosophy, right?
Yeah. And interestingly, he argues it has deep roots, like centuries deep roots in American history and thought. So it's not just about 2016 for him.
Right. It's framed as building this sustainable intellectual framework, not just, rally chants.
What's really insightful here is, even though it came out a few years ago, the book still seems to echo in political discussions today. It kind of provides a foundation for understanding a lot of ongoing debates, policy directions.
Yeah, that raises a good question. Why is it still worth talking about now? Why the relevance today?
Well, that's the crucial point, isn't it? I think its relevance comes from how much it still seems to influence, or at least reflect, thinking across a whole range of policy areas.
Okay, like what? Can you give some examples?
Sure. You definitely see its influence or echoes of its ideas in trade negotiations. Think about the shift from NAFTA to the USMCA.
Right, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, and pulling out of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Exactly, that America First trade approach. Then there's industrial policy, the whole push to bring factories, manufacturing back to the U.S., reducing that reliance on foreign supply chains.
That's a big one.
What else?
Well, the whole debate around big tech, the critiques of their power, governance, censorship concerns, data privacy, antitrust questions, a lot of that aligns very closely with the arguments Kirk makes in the book.
Okay. And the courts, that seems like a major focus too.
Absolutely huge. The focus on judicial appointments, federal courts, and especially the Supreme Court has had a massive, visible, long-term impact. It's shaping legal interpretation for potentially decades.
No question about that. And free speech.
Yes, the broader conversation around free speech, its limits, how to protect it today. The book tackles that head-on as a core liberty. Kirk himself says pretty directly that the MAGA doctrine, quote, didn't spring into existence in 2016.
He sees it as older, right? Much older. He calls it the core philosophy by which our whole society has come to be over several centuries. So he's arguing for this really deep historical grounding for these ideas, not just a recent political phenomenon.
That's a significant claim. Okay, so here's where it seems to get really interesting, and maybe where it departs a bit from, say, traditional conservatism. Kirk doesn't just critique big government, does he?
No, not at all. That's a key expansion. Criticizing big government is, standard conservative fare for decades, but he dramatically broadens the scope of the perceived problem.
So this term he uses, big everything. What does that actually encompass? Who or what is the adversary here, according to Kirk?
Right. Big everything. If we kind of connect the dots here, Kirk uses it to mean all the entrenched forces that he argues ordinary Americans are just completely fed up with.
And it goes way beyond just the government, the bureaucracy.
Way beyond. It includes, first off, big tech. He's talking Silicon Valley, Google, YouTube, Facebook. He mentions Twitter mobs, concerns about censorship. That's a big piece.
Okay, big tech. What else is in big everything?
Then there's big media. He accuses them of churning out lies, fake news, basically eroding trust in traditional news outlets.
Got it. Tech, media.
Then he talks about bureaucratic networks. This is a really broad category. It could be EPA busybody bureaucrats, as he calls them, or UN blowhards, but also wider concepts like swamp monsters, that term for entrenched officials, lobbyists, the military-industrial complex, which goes back to Eisenhower, actually. Big Pharma is in there, even out-of-control prosecutors.
Wow, okay. That's a very wide net.
It is, and he doesn't stop there. He adds other sclerotic and power-hungry institutions. He names Harvard, media conglomerates like Viacom, the UN again.
So the point isn't just one specific institution, it's this whole interconnected system.
Exactly. What's insightful is how he frames it as this pervasive systemic challenge. It's not just one bad actor, it's this deep web of powerful entities that he believes are operating against the interests of, regular people.
And the goal is a restoration of self-rule.
That's the framing. Bringing power back to a populace that he says has been long taken for granted by its rulers.
That's certainly a powerful and very broad way to frame the problem. So if that's the anti-big everything narrative, what's the core belief driving it? And how does the book say power should actually be returned to citizens from all these forces?
Well, the core belief, according to Kirk, is actually pretty simple on the surface, but profound in its implications. Bigger is not always better.
Okay.
He argues the ideal role for government, and you could probably extend this to other powerful institutions too, should be, quote, so small that it is barely noticeable.
Almost invisible.
Pretty much.
Go.
And the political narrative he builds is that these big institutions, government, tech, media, whatever, have formed this. He calls it an unholy alliance, or even a two-party cartel.
A cartel, meaning they work together for their own benefit.
That's the assertion, that this alliance primarily benefits itself, the insiders, not the American people. And this leads to gridlock, constant spending increases, just general stagnation.
So it prevents real progress.
That's the argument. And the book really hammers this point. Protecting individual liberty from the tyrannical forces of government is the idea our nation was built upon.
A foundational principle.
Right. And then, crucially, he extends that protection. It's not just about the individual versus the state. It's also about protecting families, local churches, local schools, these foundational units of society from those same big forces trying to exert control or influence.
Okay, that clarifies the philosophy and the definition of the enemy, so to speak. But how does the book talk about actually doing this? What are the practical techniques, the narrative strategies for challenging these big institutions? It mentions the disruptor archetype, grassroots stuff, media competition.
Yeah, it highlights several key narrative techniques that Kirk sees as vital. First, you have the disruptor archetype, and this is really personified by Donald Trump.
Right, he fits that mold perfectly in this narrative.
Totally. He's presented as the outsider from the inside, a fellow rebel who came in and disrupted that decrepitude, as Kirk puts it. He's framed as someone uniquely willing to say forbidden things.
Things the establishment wouldn't touch.
Exactly. Ideas or criticisms the status quo deems unacceptable, willing to directly challenge things. Kirk even makes a historical comparison, kind of like Cicero fighting conspiracies in ancient Rome.
Interesting parallel.
And he's also portrayed as this sharp entrepreneur, someone who built a business, so he understands economics, regulations, better than, Kirk calls them, fashionable socialist politicians who maybe only have theoretical knowledge.
Practical experience versus theory.
Right. And finally, Trump's depicted as a media star who got how the media worked, its failings, and crucially, how to get around it. So this disruptor figure is central to framing the whole thing as a genuine challenge to the establishment.
Okay, that's the disruptor. What about grassroots mobilization?
That's the second key element. The book puts a huge emphasis on grassroots mobilization. And here, Kirk points directly to his own organization, Turning Point USA, as a prime example.
And he highlights its growth, right?
Yeah, significant growth. He mentions going from like a $2 million budget to $20 million pretty quickly. And it's reached presence on around 1,600 campuses. That's high schools and colleges.
That's a lot of campuses.
It is. And a large membership base, over 250,000 students involved. He cites their big events, the Teen Student Action Summit, Young Black Leadership Summit, Young Jewish Leadership Summit, as proof of this widespread youth engagement.
And the purpose is to counter other ideas on campus.
Yeah, to provide a counterbalance to what he sees as dominant liberal ideas on campus. And these are framed as low-cost, high-frequency strategies designed for broad, ongoing, accessible engagement, building that base.
Okay, so disruptor, grassroots.
Yeah.
What was the third one?
Yeah.
Media competition.
Right, media framework competition. Kirk really stresses how important it is to actively fight in the battle of ideas, not just accept the narratives pushed by traditional media.
And Trump's use of social media fits into this.
Perfectly. His use of Twitter especially is framed as this direct, personal, Kirk calls it a democratizing, decentralizing impulse.
Bypassing the middleman, the traditional media.
Exactly. It challenges those, quote, phony political communications by giving people a direct glimpse of his train of thought. The book argues this direct line is like a crucible for getting at the truth and shooting down nonsense very quickly.
So it's about creating a different media ecosystem.
Yeah, a dynamic, responsive one where the movement's message can get straight to the people without that filter of what he views as a biased mainstream media.
Okay, so we've got the core ideas, the narrative style. Let's pivot now to the actual policies, the specific pillars laid out in the book. Let's start with America first in terms of foreign economics, trade, industry. What's the problem Kirk identifies here?
Well, the book really zeroes in on what it sees as deeply unfair trade deals from the past. NAFTA gets called out specifically, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
The argument being it didn't benefit everyone.
Right. The claim is it mainly benefited the powerful in each country at the expense of the people. It argues American companies faced huge hurdles, regulations, taxes from foreign governments when trying to compete. It's an uneven playing field.
And the result was?
The result, according to the book, was a decline in American manufacturing. Industries getting hollowed out, job losses, basically a weakening of the country's economic sovereignty.
Okay, so that's the problem. What's the America First assertion, the proposed fix? What's the logic?
Kirk argues America First isn't about being aggressive or isolationist. He frames it as pragmatic. Seeking fairness and the rule of law in trade, operating from practical self-interest.
How does that translate into action?
It means aggressively renegotiating trade deals. The USMCA replacing NAFTA is presented as the key success story here. Withdrawing from the TPP is another example. It's about prioritizing the national interest.
And prioritizing domestic industry.
Absolutely. Pushing policies to make America, quote, hospitable to business again. That means streamlining regulations, major tax reforms to attract investment and jobs back home.
What about tariffs? They were a big part of this.
Yes, tariffs are explicitly seen as a legitimate tool, not just for revenue, but as leverage to remove foreign barriers, fight unfair practices, and ensure fair competition for U.S. businesses.
Oh.
It's about rebalancing things in favor of American workers and industries.
So what does the book project as the potential upside, the positive impacts of this approach?
Well, the book suggests that in the long run, it actually creates a win-win because fair trade, a level playing field, discourages predatory behavior by anyone.
And domestically?
Domestically, it projects significant industrial repatriation factories, jobs coming back to the U.S. This leads to an economic boom, more employment. It points to the record low unemployment rates for Black and Latino workers and over 150 million people employed during the Trump years as evidence this works.
Tangible benefits.
Right. And beyond just trade deals, it also mentions getting an extra $100 billion from NATO allies because of Trump's tougher negotiation stance, showing the financial upside of this firm, pragmatic approach elsewhere, too.
Now, an approach like America First obviously stirs up controversy. What about the criticisms, the trade-offs acknowledged in the book itself?
It definitely acknowledges the pushback. It notes that globalist critics often called Trump's approach protectionist mania. They worried it would, quote, smash the delicate web of commerce, destabilize the global economy.
And internal opposition.
Yes, it points to partisan obstruction at home. For instance, it highlights Democrats stalling the USMCA ratification, even though unions apparently supported it. This is framed as politics over national benefit.
So it shows that tension between nationalist economics and the more established globalist view.
Exactly. A deep ideological divide. What's really insightful is how Kirk positions the MAGA doctrine here as a deliberate break from that post-Cold War consensus on global trade, arguing for a return to a more transactional, nationally focused economic strategy.
Okay, let's shift from economics to foreign policy and national security, the next pillar. Ending the endless wars. What's the core problem identified in America's historical approach here?
The main issue, as the book sees it, is this pattern of constant, costly military interventions overseas since World War II. Iraq and Afghanistan are the prime examples cited.
And the cost isn't just financial, though that's huge.
The financial cost is staggering, yeah. Trillions lost. The book quotes $6 trillion just since 2001 in Iraq, Afghanistan, and nearby regions. That's almost a quarter of the federal debt, it claims.
Wow.
But beyond money, the argument is these wars yield few benefits for U.S. interests or stability. They just make the U.S. poorer, hurting resources from domestic needs.
And allies.
Allies get criticized, too, often called deadbeats for not paying their fair share for alliances like NATO, putting too much burden on the U.S. taxpayer.
So what's the book's assertion for a better approach? How do you end the endless wars?
The doctrine strongly advocates for limited intervention. It stresses the limitations of our knowledge of other cultures, urging caution about trying to run other countries or impose solutions.
A focus on cost-benefit.
A rigorous cost-benefit assessment for any potential military action. It loves citing examples of wasteful spending, like an $85 million hotel in Kabul that was just a shell, or a $750 million power project on land they didn't own.
Right, examples of inefficiency.
Exactly. It also calls for pushing allies hard to pay their fair share. And it champions direct one-on-one diplomacy, referencing talks with North Korea, renegotiating the Iran deal, engaging adversaries without preconditions.
And bringing back older ideas.
Yeah, it explicitly reaffirms the Monroe Doctrine's principle. Avoid getting tangled in old world affairs, protect your own sovereignty. It's a clear signal away from global interventionism. What's interesting is how it reframes strength, not as projecting military power everywhere, but as strategic restraint, focusing on national interests. A real shift from typical post-Cold War thinking.
So what are the potential impacts? What does this ending the endless wars approach hope to achieve for the U.S.?
Well, the potential impacts listed are pretty significant, achieving real peace and strength, but without draining American resources and lives unnecessarily.
Freeing up resources.
Exactly. A big reduction in the military burden on taxpayers, which means more money and attention for domestic problems, infrastructure. The book even jokes about fixing potholes in Times Square.
A focus inward.
Right. And a smaller U.S. military footprint in places like Syria, Afghanistan, parts of Africa. Disengaging from what it sees as costly, unwinnable conflicts. Redirecting that national energy back home.
Makes sense. But what about the controversies? This kind of shift is always debated heavily.
For sure. The book notes that critics, often from the traditional foreign policy establishment, jump to label it isolationist. They worry it means giving up global leadership, creating power vacuums.
It also addresses criticism from the left.
It does. It points out what it calls the fickleness of the left, arguing they advocated for peace before, but then criticized Trump when he actually tried to pursue it, like with Iran or pulling troops from Afghanistan.
Contrasting approaches.
Yeah, it contrasts Trump's common-sense moral judgments, like not retaliating militarily against Iran over a drone incident where many might have died, with the more traditional hawkish positions you see across the spectrum, which it suggests often default to military action. Kirk is really challenging that bipartisan consensus on foreign policy here, saying pragmatism and national interest can be both peaceful and strong.
Okay, let's pivot back home now to domestic economics. The pillar Kirk calls making the economy work again. What specific problems does the book highlight here?
Kirk paints a picture of a sclerotic, stifled economy. He cites the closure of 60,000 factories as a major sign of industrial decline.
And taxes and regulations.
Big factors, according to the book. High corporate tax rates discourage investment, both from within the U.S. and from overseas. And then there's this huge burden of excessive, often redundant federal regulations that just choked businesses, job creation, innovation, tied entrepreneurs' hands.
Creating stagnation.
Exactly. An environment that just wasn't working for ordinary Americans, in his view.
So what are the core solutions, the proposed solutions from the Mickey Doctrine to fix this, to make the economy work again?
Aggressive deregulation is front and center, advocating for a freeze on new regulations, and this policy of repealing roughly 22 old ones for every new one brought in.
A dramatic reduction.
Huge. Plus, significant tax cuts, $5.5 trillion mentioned, especially cutting the corporate tax rate, which the book notes was among the highest in the developed world before the reforms.
And energy. That seems key too.
Absolutely. Achieving energy independence is a major pillar. That meant pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, ending the so-called war on coal, approving pipelines, developing areas like ANWR safely, promoting fracking.
The goal being self-sufficiency.
Yes. The book asserts this led to record oil and gas production, making the U.S. a net exporter of natural gas for the first time in 60 years. Kirk even uses the Woolman rink renovation story, Trump fixing it fast and under budget, as a metaphor for this practical problem-solving approach to governance, cutting through red tape.
Right, showing bureaucratic inertia can be beaten. What's interesting is how energy policy gets linked directly to national security and economic strength.
Definitely. It's framed as a critical piece of American independence.
So what results does the book attribute to these policies? What are the predicted impacts?
It claims these policies sparked a major economic boom. Cites the Dow Jones Index rising 9,000 points, 5 million new jobs created, including 500,000 in manufacturing, over 100,000 in oil and gas.
And unemployment.
Record low unemployment rates are highlighted across many groups. Black, Hispanic, Asian American, women, young people, veterans, plus rising consumer confidence, higher wages.
And the energy independence outcome.
That's seen as reducing dependence on foreign energy, which in turn lessens the geopolitical reasons for military interventions abroad. The book also points to 5 million people moving off food stamps as a sign of broader economic health and less reliance on government aid, fostering self-sufficiency.
And what about the controversies surrounding this economic vision? What trade-offs or criticisms does Kirk address?
Well, he notes that critics, especially Democrats, often either ignored these economic gains or, if they acknowledged them, framed them negatively, attributing them to other causes or finding reasons for outrage.
And critiques of alternative ideas.
Strong critiques. The book dismisses ideas like the Green New Deal or Bernie Sanders' big spending plans as socialist, arguing they're not American values and would lead straight to economic decline.
And a contrast with some past Republicans.
Yeah, it points out that Republicans in the Bush era often went along with bailouts. It contrasts this with Trump's approach, which aimed to avoid handouts and dependency, arguing those just perpetuated reliance instead of fostering free markets. So, a break even with parts of the traditional GOP on economic intervention, Kirk really frames economics as a battle over core American values.
Let's move to the Constitution and the courts, the Bill of Rights and judicial legacy pillar. What specific problems does the book see here?
It highlights several major threats to basic liberties. Free speech is a big one, citing campus speech codes, alleged censorship by big tech, bias response teams at universities. Even worries about government agencies like the FEC potentially policing misinformation.
So a chilling effect on speech.
That's the concern. It also raises alarms about the erosion of Second Amendment rights and deep skepticism about government surveillance referencing things like the Patriot Act, the Snowden revelations,
and the judiciary itself.
The long-term problem identified is a federal judiciary that, if not filled with judges following originalist principles, could drift away from the Constitution and undermine liberty.
So what does the MAGA doctrine assert needs to be done to protect these rights and secure that judicial legacy?
A really strong, unwavering defense of the Bill of Rights. It mentions an executive order requiring federally funded colleges to respect the First Amendment.
Using executive power.
Right. And it points to Trump's own use of Twitter as exercising free speech, contrasting it with what it calls the media's war on the First Amendment.
And the Second Amendment.
Strong support highlighted there, too. Mentions Trump hunting with his son, his general backing of gun owners' rights, and deep skepticism of government surveillance concerns about FISA courts tracking lone wolves.
But the biggest piece seems to be the judges.
Absolutely crucial. The book emphasizes Trump's strategic focus on appointing conservative federal judges at all levels, including the 2 Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, as his true lasting legacy. The goal is to reassert originalist constitutional principles, lock in individual liberty protections for the long haul. It's really positioning the judiciary as the ultimate defense against big everything.
What are the potential impacts, the long-term consequences expected from this judicial strategy?
The book anticipates a fundamental reshaping of the federal judiciary over time, leading to stronger protections for constitutional rights, more checks on government power, as judges apply that originalist interpretation.
Any nuances mentioned?
Interestingly, it notes Trump was the first president to enter office already supporting gay marriage, and that his administration gently pushed for LGBTQ+ rights abroad, framing this as a broader commitment to liberty, maybe beyond just traditional conservative lines.
Okay, and specific court cases.
It highlights a unanimous Supreme Court decision overturning asset forfeiture as a big win for property rights advocates, showing the real-world impact of these judicial appointments on protecting individuals from government overreach.
And what about the controversies? This area is always highly charged.
Kirk definitely addresses the intense opposition. He talks about the obsessive attacks from Democrats on judicial nominees, citing the Kavanaugh confirmation battle, the questioning of Amy Coney Barrett's Catholicism, framing it as partisan resistance to principled conservatives.
And critiques of the left on free speech.
Yeah, the book criticizes the left for, in its view, eroding free speech through an ever-expanding definition of hate, and for considering legal ways to combat misinformation, which it argues inevitably leads to censorship.
What about federalism?
Trump's deference to states on things like cannabis legalization is presented as a commitment to letting states experiment, limiting federal power. Though, of course, that raises its own questions about consistency. The core tension Kirk presents is this battle over the meaning of the Constitution itself.
Okay, let's shift to a very modern issue. Tech sector governance. What's the problem the Meiji Doctrine sees with big tech?
The book argues that big tech companies, Google, YouTube, Facebook, are named, wield enormous unchecked power to, quote, determine the bounds of acceptable discourse, essentially acting as gatekeepers of online speech.
Accusations of censorship and monopoly.
Direct accusations of censorship and potential monopoly behavior that stifles competition and free expression. There's also this deep concern that these companies are quietly blending into the state.
Oh, so?
Through cooperation with intelligence agencies mentioning deep state requests for user data or Amazon sharing doorbell footage with police, it paints a picture of blurring lines between private tech and government surveillance.
And collaboration with foreign powers.
Yeah, it explicitly accuses some tech giants of working with authoritarian regimes, like Google, allegedly developing skewed search results for China's social credit system. This raises alarms about centralized information control threatening democracy globally. Kirk is really extending that big everything critique to these powerful digital gatekeepers.
So what does the book assert should be done? How should the tech sector be governed?
The MAGA doctrine is very critical of this concentrated power. It calls for greater transparency and assurance of fairness in how these platforms operate and moderate content.
More regulation. Or something else.
Interestingly, it's cautious about just piling on government regulation, fearing that could create its own problems. The initial focus, it suggests, should be on challenging monopolies through antitrust action, though it calls antitrust a potentially sloppy, government-mandated solution if real competition doesn't emerge naturally.
So promoting competition is key.
Yes. Encouraging more companies to enter the market and compete is the preferred path. Let market forces and consumer choice curb the power of the giants. It also warns strongly against mission creep in regulation, where vague terms like hate or unsafe get used to suppress legitimate speech. The idea is to restore market principles and free speech, not empower government to control online talk.
What potential impacts does the book foresee if these principles are adopted for tech?
The main goal is protecting free discourse, ensuring a marketplace of ideas isn't unfairly censored, safeguarding user privacy, preventing data exploitation, and ultimately protecting democratic processes by stopping private companies from manipulating information or unduly influencing public opinion.
Fostering competition.
Right. By fostering real competition and innovation, the tech sector will become more dynamic, more responsive to users, instead of being these dominant gatekeepers. The book even warns that if people don't trust online communication, they might take to the streets and protest, using Hong Kong as an example. It's about preventing tech from becoming this unchecked power center.
And the controversies or trade-offs in dealing with big tech. It's a tricky area.
Definitely. The book warns that giving government more power to regulate tech could backfire, maybe leading to an even more powerful and politicized government-Google partnership, a new kind of big everything.
An unintended consequence.
Exactly. It also points out the irony, as it sees it, of Silicon Valley donating heavily to Democrats, even though democratic policies often involve more regulation and taxes for tech.
And international influence.
Yeah. It notes how pressure from, say, EU regulators on Facebook over hate speech can lead to broader censorship globally, affecting American speech standards too, as companies adopt stricter rules everywhere. It highlights that delicate balance. How do you curb tech power without giving too much power to the government?
Okay, final policy pillar. Healthcare, opioids, and justice reform. Covering some key social policy areas. What problems does the book identify here?
In healthcare, it describes the system as a total mess, an overlapping mess of government, markets, employers, and insurance companies. The big problem: lack of transparency.
Leading to high costs and limited choice.
Exactly. High costs, limited patient choice. It uses Obamacare's individual mandate and its penalty as an example of government overreach that didn't solve the core issues.
And the opioid crisis?
The book acknowledges the opioid crisis as a devastating, widespread public health emergency, recognizes its huge impact.
What about criminal justice?
It's critical of the U.S. having the highest incarceration rate in the world. It slams inflexible mandatory minimum sentences and arbitrary sentencing differences, like the historical disparity between crack and powder cocaine, arguing these create injustice.
So, what are the book's assertions, the proposed solutions for these complex social issues?
For healthcare, the emphasis is on transparency and market freedom. It highlights the American Patients First plan, which mandated clear price posting for medical services to empower consumers.
And changing the system structure.
Yes, trying to break the link between employment and healthcare. encouraging people to buy insurance individually on an open market to boost choice and competition.
And for criminal justice reform.
It champions the First Step Act, that bipartisan reform bill. This helped nonviolent offenders earn time off for good behavior, retroactively reduced the crack powder sentencing gap, allowed for compassionate release, placed inmates closer to family, focused on rehabilitation.
What about opioids?
Trump's focus on the opioid crisis is presented as tackling a real problem by abandoning losing tactics and trying more practical, community-focused solutions. The overall idea is that free market principles plus targeted, compassionate reforms can work better than big government programs.
What positive impacts does the book envision from these social policies?
It expects lower healthcare costs and more patient choice through market transparency and competition. For justice, a reduction in unnecessary incarceration, better rehabilitation for former prisoners, and a more effective approach to the opioid crisis, treating it more like a public health issue.
And broader economic effects.
By fostering a stronger economy overall, it aims to reduce dependency on government aid, helping more people become self-sufficient. It's about empowering individuals and communities, not top-down mandates.
And what about the controversies or trade-offs Kirk addresses in these areas?
He points out what he calls the embarrassment for liberals, noting that candidates like Biden and Harris had passed records supporting tougher crime policies, which contrasted with Trump's push for the First Step Act reforms.
Pushback on healthcare changes.
Yes, acknowledging that critics argued ending the individual mandate would crash Obamacare. The book makes a strong statement. Great countries don't usually incarcerate people who haven't hurt anyone. This shows a deliberate move away from older, tough-on-crime conservatism, challenging norms even within the movement.
Okay, so we've covered the philosophy, the policies. How does this translate into action? What's the methodology, the mobilization strategy?
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the MAGA doctrine really pushes these low-cost, high-frequency strategies, ways to engage people broadly and persistently, especially younger people.
Focusing on youth and grassroots mobilization.
Exactly. Kirk's own Turning Point USA is the prime example here. That huge presence on over 1,500 high school and college campuses, the 250,000+ student members.
And the events.
Those big events, Teen Student Action Summit, Young Black Leadership Summit, Young Jewish Leadership Summit, are key for activating and organizing youth, giving them platforms. Students for Trump aiming to activate 1 million new college voters in 2020 is another example of the scale. It's about constant, accessible engagement to build that base.
And media outreach is part of this low-cost, high-frequency idea.
Definitely. Kirk himself is presented as a model. His huge social media reach, over 100 million people a month, claimed top 10 engaged Twitter handle globally. His podcast, The Charlie Kirk Show, often high on the charts.
Direct communication channels.
Crucial. Bypassing traditional media gatekeepers, reaching citizens directly. It fits perfectly with Trump's Twitter use, praised in the book as that great agitator, that democratizing, decentralizing impulse, challenging phony political talk, creating that direct connection.
So, beyond just mobilizing support, how does the book suggest translating these anti-big everything and America First ideas into actual local governance, affecting things on the ground?
That's a key part. It's not just about federal politics. The book strongly advocates pushing these principles into concrete changes at the local and state levels, too.
Like getting involved in schools.
Yes. Engaging with school boards is highlighted, seeing that as a front line and countering ideas they disagree with. Also, influencing state legislation, talking directly to businesses about policy impacts, showing how grassroots work can shape local environments.
So change from the bottom up, not just top down.
Exactly. The idea is that real change needs to be built locally, empowering citizens to reclaim control. Kirk uses that Woolman Ring story again. Trump fixing it fast, under budget, defying bureaucracy. It's a metaphor for applying practical, results-driven approaches at all levels, showing greatness can come again through direct action, defying that arrogant, well-off, smug stratum of society he believes holds things back.
Okay, let's pull it all together then. After digging into all this, what's the lasting significance? What's the impact of this book, this MAGA doctrine, on American policy and politics?
Well, if you look at the big picture, the MAGA doctrine, as presented, acts as this critical bridge. It took what some saw as just populist feelings or general conservative sentiment and turned it into a much more concrete, coherent policy toolkit.
Giving it structure and legitimacy.
Right. It arguably shifted the national agenda and the whole policy conversation by providing this comprehensive framework. It connects different concerns under one umbrella, offering this alternative vision.
Can you point to specific shifts in priorities or language?
Sure. Think about trade first. That really reordered priorities, didn't it? Moving away from global agreements towards renegotiation NAFTA to USMCA, pulling out of TPP, that's a fundamental shift. Then energy independence, moving away from international climate deals like Paris towards maximizing domestic production.
Yeah.
That reduces foreign reliance, which subtly changes foreign policy calculations too.
And big tech.
Platform governance absolutely became a mainstream debate, bringing big tech's power, censorship concerns, data issues into the national conversation in a way they really weren't before.
The courts.
The judicial legacy focus fundamentally reshapes the federal judiciary, with impacts on law and liberty for potentially generations.
And foreign policy.
And ending endless wars. Introducing that cost-benefit thinking to military interventions, questioning long engagements, pushing allies to pay more. These aren't just policy tweaks. They represent shifts in language, priorities, the ideological underpinnings of political debate.
That's a clear picture of its significance. But what about limitations? The book can't suggest these ideas work exactly the same way everywhere, right? Given how diverse the U.S. is. What about transferability, boundary conditions?
That's a fair point, and the book does seem to acknowledge practical limits, at least implicitly. While it champions state experimentation, like with cannabis legalization, where states vary wildly, it has to operate within the constraints of different state laws, federal versus state powers, existing court rulings.
So it's not a rigid blueprint.
Not exactly. It seems to promote a more decentralized approach. The idea that, quote, what works is best discovered through variety and experimentation, not a few experts getting together in Washington and telling everyone what to do. So it recognizes that applying the doctrine has to adapt to different contexts, the realities of federalism.
Finally, let's look at its relationship with traditional conservatism. How does the MAGA doctrine build on or break from older conservative ideas?
Well, one major shift is the expansion from just small government to that broader anti-big everything critique. Traditional conservatism focused heavily on limiting government. The MAGA doctrine widens the target list significantly, adding big tech, big media, bureaucratic networks, redefining the adversary for many conservatives.
Okay, but are there connections to older conservatism too? Continuity?
Oh yeah, definitely points of continuity. It shares values with free market thinkers like Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell's skepticism of central planning, emphasis on individual liberty, critiques of the welfare state, questioning affirmative action. Still a strong focus on the Constitution, especially originalism and American exceptionalism.
Where does it diverge most sharply?
The divergence is pretty clear from neoconservatism, especially on foreign policy. The whole ending the endless wars stance is a direct break from advocating for an American empire or interventionist big government conservatism.
And from establishment Republicans.
Divergence there, too, on issues like trade, military interventions, maybe even some social issues like Trump's prior support for gay marriage is noted. The book really argues that many pre-Trump right figures were, quote, going about things entirely the wrong way, maybe even enjoying the endless stalemate.
So a critique of the establishment itself.
Absolutely. Suggesting a break from a perceived, complacent, ineffective conservative establishment. Kirk positions this new framework as revitalizing conservatism by challenging both external big everything and internal conservative orthodoxies he argues had failed.
So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you, the listener, as we look ahead?
It really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? The MAGA doctrine presents itself as more than just policies. It's framed as a path to national renewal. What does it actually mean for a society to try and reclaim a pioneering spirit in our current age? An age of instant information, huge technological shifts, complex global ties.
Yeah, how might these ideas continue to shape how we even define American greatness in the years to come, regardless of who's in power?
Exactly. How will they influence the ongoing debates about America's core principles? That's something to think about.
Definitely a powerful thought to leave you with, inviting us all to consider how these foundational ideas evolve and how influential frameworks like this attempt to reshape them. This has been a very deep dive into the MAGA doctrine.